So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Viz. This month we're doing a special on all the IronViz entries. This year's theme is on food and drinks, which is a pretty exciting topic for some. And today I have Nick with me, my very good buddy, who is talking about beer. I'm not a beer person, I'm a whiskey guy, but I've learned so much about beer in his Viz. So I'll let Nick do a little intro about himself and then we'll dive into the Viz.
My name is Nick Pillsbury. I am a Staff BIE over at Webflow. Quick intro, I would describe myself as falling into data by accident. I just so happened to have a childhood background in Excel when it was still measured in like years, 98, 99. And I got a contract gig once, and I remember the local BI team were like, oh, we just don't have enough time. Does anybody know Excel who can help us with our weekly business reviews? I just happened to be skilled in VLOOKUP. I can help you with index match. And from there, the story is like so many other people. Excel just wasn't strong enough. I needed to do some queries to pre-aggregate. Oh, okay, my queries are running a little slow. Let me do some iterative tables, or I'll store in a table. Let me use Tableau. Oh, it's still not going fast enough. Let me become a DBA and pipeline all of my work and stand up my own Redshift clusters. And now here I am doing data like everybody else. You just kind of fall into it by accident. But you mentioned you're not into beers, which is totally normal. It's super cultural. Beer is wildly different. In fact, even in my Viz, they break it down into like 3 styles of ale, lager, and other.
So before we dive into your Viz, what was the inspiration behind this idea?
I'm more of a cook than I am a brewer. And I was thinking about like, should I do my pantry? Should I do it on my favorite recipes? Should I do it on my favorite icebreaker question, which is, if you had a restaurant, what would be your signature dish? But we were doing a bunch of house construction work. And during that time, I had to move a bookshelf. And one of the books on it was this little guy, Beer Review Logbook. One of the things that stood out is it has this little piece of paper sticking in it. This is what made me think of this. In it, because we do brew, we do some home brews at home, and it's tons of fun, super delicious, would recommend, is I found our old list for this Cremora Cream Ale, one of the best beers we ever made. The brewer store would fill out, and it's got all of your different malts and wheats on it. And it just says 5 pounds this, 3 pounds that. So if we ever wanted to make it again, we could just literally take the slip and be like, hey, last time you gave me, it says here, 8 pounds of 2-row, half a pound of Crystal 20, and 1 pound of flaked corn. And I could brew something very similar again. But what reminded me of this is this paper is the same for every single beer, which means that every single beer uses these things. And I know that's also true for hops. I could use Centennial, a very, very popular hop out here in Washington, and I could brew 1 million styles of beer. And I was like, well, I could probably do something like that. So I went onto American Homebrewers Association, and I looked at all their recipes. And of course, just like I thought, they all have a lot of overlap. That's where I said, oh, so I've got thousands, if you count the undocumented ones, the non-show beers, and they all share, 100 ingredients? So that's how I ended up on this title, How a Little Difference Can Brew a Long Way, and then everything else fell into place after that.
Oh, that's really cool. How long have you been brewing beer at home? Did you get started on it?
I started probably, my son is 10, and so that would mean that I started probably about 8, 9 years ago. We were making fruit wines. We had this fantastic strawberry rhubarb wine, and it was amazing. Super popular, great at parties, great to bring to your coworkers. Hey, everyone like a bottle of wine. But then we also made beer, because why not? The process is similar but different. And so maybe every year or so, we might do 1 or 2 brews, usually in the summer, where it's nice to sit outside with friends and spend 3 hours by a burner and a boiling pot of water.
Do you need a lot of setup to brew beer at home?
Definitely not. I think you could get by with maybe 5 to 6 common kitchen implements. And if you're doing a small batch, like a 1-gallon size, you could do it all on your kitchen top.
Maybe what we can do next is walk us through your story, because you started off with this really cool tree diagram that breaks down that beers category into multiple different beers from regions and origins. And then you went through the process, which is kind of one of my favorite parts of your Viz, where you have some sort of waterfall chart at the left side, and then you can actually click through. How hard was it to get the data for the Home Brewer Association, and how much work you had to do to clean that? Because I imagine that's quite a bit of work.
It's a fun story, and I recommend it to a ton of people. Obviously, IronViz is a fantastic contest, but I try to do other contests as well, especially internal ones. So when I was at Amazon, there was an internal contest every year. Oftentimes when I'm working with people, they're like, oh, I really want data from source X, but it's a huge pain to get. Like you said, I was working with another friend of ours, Brittany Rose now, who was working at Amazon at the time with me, and she wanted to do one on sustainability and fish watch. My answer is the same one that I followed for myself, which is if you want their data, just send them an email. Half these places are nonprofits or small organizations. They might be thrilled to borrow your expertise, especially if you're going to give them credit, link back out to them, talk about how great they are, and they might be able to just ship you the data because they probably use it themselves. So for me, the first thing I did was I went to the homebrewers recipe page. It's like 80 tabs, 30 beers each, click into each one. The pages aren't always formatted the same. I was like, oh, I really don't want to scrape this. Email at, then the thing is like, oh, if you have any questions, email us. Like, hey, my name's Nick. Here's what I want to do. It's for IronViz. I know you have non-paywalled recipes. I would really love to use it for this. Here's what I've been looking for. Can you help me? And unfortunately, they couldn't because they didn't have a MySQL base on hand. It was all coded back in a good old CMS, content management service, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. So I do recommend trying it, even if it didn't work out in my favor this time. What I ended up doing is actually one of a really interesting odd hack. In my Viz is you have all these little beer bubbles at the top, and each one is secretly a beer. So if I wanted to go and look at this Northern German Pilsner lager, I can actually click it. It brings you to this. Here's the Thirsty Pig IPA. I went to another place called Beersmith where I get some of my recipes. And it has the same data where it lists out info about the beer, the ingredients list, the beer profile. And it's got really everything that I need, except this is terrible. I can't copy paste this out. It's awful. Originally, I wrote a little script. And you can see pieces of it over here on the side here, where I would go in, use Python, request beautiful soup, scan my pages, find a bunch of stuff, but it wasn't quite working because it actually turned out that if you actually go in, right click, view page source, this stuff down here is full of a bunch of weird table formats. And those table formats just didn't play well with beautiful soup, at least not in a way that I, a data expert, not a coding expert, could really do in a comfortable way in the short amount of time that I had. What I found out is you can, from this view, copy it and you just paste it into your favorite code editor. You set it over to HTML. And this is the weird part. If you then copy that into an Excel sheet, it converts the HTML into a proper table. And so what I could do is actually take this data, go to my real data. So I have a sheet, beer inputs. I have the URL, the beer name, and then I just have the amount and the item. And I can literally just paste this in underneath this section. And so that's something I can do really quick, and then it's off to the races. That took me, I would call it 2 afternoons. Just after work, dinner's done and cooked for the family, sit down, my son is playing games behind me at his desk, and I just go on a little copy paste stream. I listen to music, so maybe 8 hours total.
This is a really neat trick. So let's dive a little bit into the design of it. Talk us through the color choices that you had, the chart choices that you had.
As a secret tidbit, I accidentally did publish my Viz twice, and I was terrified at like 1 minute past deadline. I was like, wait, did I submit the right one? Do I need to cut the ticket? So it's just a little bit of healthy paranoia. For IronViz, I do a couple. Again, like I said, I have an old version, which is like a few saves before completion. I have like some notes that I leave myself as I'm working. And I can also super quickly draft. I'm sure you've seen a million times. Obviously, the first thing I try to figure out is like, what's going to be my rough shape? I end up changing the size a million times, but I know, like, am I going to be wide, tall, or paginated is really what it boils down to. And for this one, I knew I want to do tall. I want to do scrolling. And after, once again, link Kevin Wee's great talk at Tableau Conference about sort of the golden ratio, I now know that I always at least want like something like 1600 by 1300 or something like that is what I shoot for. Then the first thing I do is I just whip out a ton of blank blocks and I just make this little colorful grid. The colors don't really matter. They don't really mean anything. I basically have a roughly evenly sized playmat for where I set things. I will go in and I'll be like, I want a super cool title with a subtitle. And then I will just start moving stuff around here. I might have an idea for heading 1. I'll put this in. And then with something like this, I can start figuring out, okay, I want roughly this much space so I can have my text box. I can have heading 2 down about yay big, and I think this is too close, so I'll make it farther. And that's like wireframe style, is this sort of make a quilt grid to get a rough sense of what do I have for component-wise, because at least for IronViz, it's all going to be floating.
Yeah, so your team floating for IronViz.
I am team floating for IronViz and IronViz only, really.
I think a lot of folks are team floating for IronViz because there's so many elements you want to put overlapping one another.
Yes, not even just titles and stuff, but even some charts. So one of my favorite charts is Have I Told You I Love You? This
I love
chart
this one.
from my last IronViz, like that's just 2 charts on top of each other. So that's largely why I like team floating, because you can do something nice without needing to be a math genius.
Oh, wait, I always thought that the Sankey diagram was part of the donut chart, but it's separate?
They are 2 separate charts. They're just aligned perfectly.
You could have fooled me. This looks amazing.
Thank you, thank you. That's partly why I'm on team floating. So the color choices, it really came down to a couple things. One of my data points is actually beer color, SRM, standard reference measurement, I think. And that really just refers to an old chemistry style, which was invented because I needed to know, is beer A the same as beer B when I brew a bunch of batches? So what this chemist did, they basically had colored sheets of glass. And so if I had 1 glass and that color matches the beer, oh, then it's an SRM1. If it takes 2 sheets, it's SRM2. If it takes 10, it's SRM10, and so on and so forth. And so I used that 0 to 40-ish scale as my base color palette, which you see throughout. The only exception is hops, which obviously you just know is this bright green. I almost said flavor, which is probably the best way to describe a hop, even in color.
I mean, they only have one flavor, bitterness, right?
Oh, you'd be surprised. Now, as I was working on this, and I secretly have a soft spot for secret charts at the top. I remember an old IronViz submission. It was a RuPaul drag race, and they had hidden a line chart in the middle that was like a line divider. And I, ever since then, have tried to put a little secret chart in somewhere, whether that be, in this case, beer bubbles at the top of mine to represent different beers, or an IMDb one I did for horror movies, which was blood drips, which was number of horror movies over time. So I knew I wanted something at the top. So I landed on beer bubbles, and I knew I had a tall thing, and I was like, well, why not a beer glass? And unfortunately, design is a passion, not a skill set for me. I really wanted to taper in the bottom like a nice beer glass, but I just couldn't quite get the look right. So I went without it. Now, for the chart choices, there's a couple. Obviously, it's IronViz. You can get away with a bar chart for most things in the real world, a bar chart or a line chart. Donut if you're feeling spicy. But if you looked around at beer styles, you've probably seen that really iconic family tree where it's all over the place. Honestly, it's really hard to read, where it's like, oh, a cream ale goes to lager, but then it also goes to other, and then it goes to this ale, and it doesn't really make sense. So I was like, well, I want a family tree of some kind. And there was actually a style guide. Like if I had to review a American Pilsner, here are the notes and expectations in the pamphlet they give to brewer judges. And that guide I turned into this tree, which has a directory style. Here are ales, and here are what qualifies as an ale, a British origin ale, et cetera. I use that, basically the chapter section, to make this family tree. The other one you mentioned at the top of the hour was sort of a pseudo waterfall chart about the beer progressive style. And you're right, I actually made the conscious decision to hide all of the data because otherwise it's kind of a lot. It's not insightful by itself because the text is what matters. I added the click to actions so that as you had this little chart, it would slowly build itself up as it tells you that story of what's going on, what are the processes. I move from milling to mashing to lautering, which is a fun word, and so on and so forth, until you finally get to the final step where you technically have a beer. You could drink it now, but as I learned the hard way from one of my Russian Imperial stouts, sometimes it needs to sit for way longer than you'd like. In my case, that one beer took almost a year, really, before it was good. We actually thought the whole batch was a botch, but it just sat effectively in the garage for a year. And we opened it one Christmas and it hissed perfectly. And it was one of the best we ever had. The one chart that was really odd, and I actually had to ask friends and foes alike, how would you do this? Because the story is that I can have wildly different beers, but they use the same ingredients. How do I show these overlaps exist in a way that's kind of succinct and chartable without doing like some 600 by 600 heat map? And so I ended up with this type of chart. This is the one under my A Grain for Every Brew called an upset plot. To add on to that, I know sometimes when people look at a lot of the IronViz submissions, they might be like, oh, it's really quote unquote pretty, or I guess it works, but how could I use this in a business sense? And I've used this chart to great success in the past for a number of reasons. Even if you're in retail, a really common example might be like, okay, what other products are they buying? If I have, let's say at the top, I have categories of users, people who spend less than $100, less than $200, over $300. Pretty simple top chart. But on the left, I might have my sections. I might have items priced at under $10, under 20, under 30, under 40, or categories, in your case, games, maybe let's say mobile games, console games, PC games. Okay, where do I overlap for these people? Or maybe I want to do something like, in my case, active users. I had people using my product, and I have, let's say, counts of users or power users maybe, or maybe clients or customers who use my service. And then on the left, I just had lists of different features. How many people are in my corporate bucket and are using this category or group of features, A, B, and C? Or what about just features A and C? So this particular chart, I think people might be like, well, it can be noisy, but I've used it in the past for a lot of very valid business reasons.
I think this is very interesting because I can see this being used in a business dashboard with a lot more dynamic measures. So you could have potentially a parameter to switch the horizontal and the vertical axis, just so that you can enable people to explore the data in a more intuitive way.
Yep, agreed.
So out of your entire Viz, what was the most challenging part of it?
Honestly, it was space. And I know there are many great Vizes out there that probably push 9,000 pixels long. I don't remember what I ended up on, but I think I was a little over 5,000. I don't want to be too verbose because I don't want to lose my reader. I don't want to literally write a book, but I also don't want to not do enough. As a personal belief, I don't believe that data can speak for itself. I need to show what it is. And sometimes that's as much as a paragraph you see for the walkthrough of like, what does this step mean and what am I doing during it? Or it can be as simple as a little highlight where in one chart, I just have up in the top corner, hey, here are 3 super outliers. They're just not even in the chart. Like that little 3-word outlier can tell a whole story about those data points. That was really the hardest part, is how do I condense it into a complete narrative without also being too dense?
I think you raised a very important point because I think as data visualization practitioners, we want the data to speak for itself, but most of the time, the data lacks the context, especially if you are giving this to someone like, for me, I'm not a beer person. I would have zero context on like how the trends are supposed to look like or what the data points or the relationship would imply. So having all of these little annotations actually help my understanding. And I think that is the most challenging part for IronViz for a lot of folks, because you're trying to tell a story from your own experience, which you have a lot of knowledge about, but your audience don't have that wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much, Nick, for spending time with us today to go through your entire process and how you shared your passion for homebrewing with us. Hope this inspires everyone, and we'll see everyone at the next episode. Thank you.